Hey guys, it's Tyler here. I wanted to talk about adventure paths, campaigns, whatever, modules, whatever your game happens to call them, pre-written adventures that you are meant to play through. I meant to do this for a while because I think there's a lot of good from them, but I think it's very difficult to run them correctly. And this is going to be a, you know, top 5 tips that'll help you do X. It probably won't be 5, but I'll basically go through how I run adventure paths when I run them. And the long and short of it is pretend the adventure path is a campaign setting. I've got it pulled up on my computer right here. I'm not going to do the OBS, have me in the corner, read along stuff. I'll just point out, how things are generally constructed. So in Serpent Skull 1 for Pathfinder First Edition, which is not a particularly good module, I never plan on running it, just letting you know, so there may be spoilers in here. They start out with the setup. The setup is an interesting part. It's something I would recommend you mostly get done through session 0, and annoyingly they don't mention this, but what I do like that they mention is setting up the PCs in difficult situations, like starting them in a prison or as gladiators or stranded on a hostile island, in media res, in the middle of the action, can create a refreshing change from the you all start at the tavern, meet in the tavern cliche. Fantastic. You don't need to read anything else about the setup here. Have the start be interesting. Have it to where to some extent the individual player character's goals doesn't really matter because there's immediate exigent need to not die or get out of prison or whatever the case is right from the get-go. So the setup, the player characters have reason to go along the path of the adventure path, or the module, as it were. This is different from railroading because you've had the session 0, you've all agreed to play this module, presumably, although I'll make a caveat to that later. Well, I'll say the caveat right now. Caveat to this is your players accidentally stumble into the adventure path. So the adventure path setup could also be, as the characters are playing through one adventure path, they end up hearing about something that's happening in the world, right? These are not scripted events like in a video game where you can only trigger them if you do certain things. You might hear about, let's say, the party does books 1 through 2 of Serpent Skull here, and then they go off the beaten path. Well, there can be this temptation to, no, we have to finish the adventure path, come back in, and you end up railroading. What you could just as easily do is, they've escaped, they've gotten off the stranded island and they're sailing right back towards civilization. Well, go through some of the other adventure paths or just campaign setting stuff about what island are they headed to? Are they headed to Cheliax? Well, maybe now we can start in the middle at book 3, book 4 of the Hell's Rebels campaign book. And then that becomes really interesting. Now you can start thinking as the GM, all right, well, has another adventuring party already completed books 1 through 3 and the players' characters are taking over here? Or has nobody addressed these problems and they've just slowly gotten worse? And that's why I say use it as a sort of guide, as this is the way the world is, assuming everything has gone totally this way. But of course it's not going to. So you'll have to use it a bit like a Lego set, right? And scrap some pieces here, here's how we recommend you build your car, but it's just Legos. We change however many pieces you need to make that work. And that can be anything from balance, but I don't think you should get too carried away there. Think about the characters that are in there. So what are the goals of the antagonists? Very often these have a big bad. Just not something I'm a fan of. See other video on that. But very often they will have an antagonist or characters that have goals. Think about how far along they get in those goals. What does the world, that section of the world, look like now that they're further along? That can create a lot of exigency, and this especially helps in high power level games like Pathfinder, where it can feel like the player characters are so strong that you're just throwing a bigger and bigger threat at them. But I think the correct way to handle that is more, there are so many problems in the world, and you can only be in one place at one time. You have to pick what problem you want to solve right now, and what problem is going to start getting worse. You can use the concept of timers, right? It can be helpful to just have like a very simple table that is like, for every book or every section of an adventure path that your player characters complete, then the antagonist in this other book completes one of his goals, right? And so this doesn't just change the balance, it doesn't just get harder, though that may be one effect of it. It can be things like, well, what was the starting sort of village area in book one of this other adventure path, it's been burned to the ground. It just simply doesn't exist anymore. And that can be the way that the party finds out about this. They wander over, they never got a letter. In one of my campaigns, in between, because at the end of a sort of arc, or whenever there's been like a satisfying conclusion to, a story, because you get the story once you're done with it, right? I will break and we'll have another session 0 and go, is there unfinished business here? Do you guys want to keep playing with these characters? They did say that. So a character from a far off land comes on horseback saying, we've heard of your exploits. You're clearly very powerful. The last guys we called to take care of this problem never returned. They ended up dead. And they could find their corpses in this horrific dungeon that has been spewing out undead because nobody's been tending to it in 100 years, and the undead have run out of corpses to eat, and now they are leaving in search of things on the surface. Could be something like that, right? That gives you because very often part of the setup is, why are we in the dungeon? Just for money? Well, if it's life-threatening, there's not too many people that are going to do very clearly, immediately life-threatening things for just money. But if it is an active threat to life coming out of the dungeon because nothing's been done about it, well, now it's a much more tempting prospect to go fix the problem. It's also much more difficult to fix the problem now that you've let it get so bad. It also creates this interesting propensity for characters to be more diplomatic and pick their battles more easily. There have been a number of times where characters have been wandering, traveling from point A to point B, and they have to wander through some countries. And I just have little notes on the map like, oh, I know there's an adventure path here, and I'll make a short, a couple sentences of what the setup here is. Stranded adventurers being attacked by island cannibals, for example, is one of them. And then, in parentheses, if I need more detail on it, what the actual adventure book is. Now, I don't recommend going book by book, and I never recommend, here's third big tip, do not read box text word for word, because your players will know. There's a thing in writing called the voice or the style, and they will know that it's not your style when you're reading from box text. They'll know it's the book's style. And it'll often just be very inorganic when you decide to read it out loud. It won't have... it will not be an organic conversation between two characters here and there. So if you have box text, modify it a bit. Let me find the first box text here. Castaway Beach. To the south, a wall of green rises in the form of a dense jungle filled with a cacophony of life. To the east and west, ragged arms of jagged rocks reach out to embrace a wave tossed up. See, I would not speak like this. My players would immediately be able to tell. So, if I wanted to just give a description here, because it's a good description, I would just say things like, To the south, there's a dense wall of jungle life with the chattering of birds and other wildlife. And then I'm going to choke mildly. I've been getting over the flu recently. To your left and right are jagged rocks reaching out from the cove with ships battered against them. There's etc. Keep going. Modify the description text. And, don't stick exactly to it. When you do read it out also, pause for your player characters to be proactive and interact with things. Don't just go from box text to box text to box text and just go on and on and on. Because the more you talk as the GM, the less the players will feel like they're going to be sitting there going, okay, when's my turn? When do I get to play? I don't want to be rude and interrupt him, but he just hasn't stopped talking. And they're not going to say that because they're probably your friends, but we're thinking it, I promise. Neighbor's dogs are barking. They're telling me to get on with it. And then as far as the conclusion, you can think about sort of the meta plot of your world. You could just end the campaign there, start with new characters, or if you wanted to continue with the same characters, think about how that's affected the world. In my current campaign, they completed Hell's Rebels. They managed to kill Abigail Thrune, the Empress of Cheliax, this country. And something I like about that is that Paizo, they don't write, what happens after she's dead. It's not even the goal of the adventure path. They just give you her stat block because she's a horrific person, and they assume that your players are probably going to want to try to kill her. And so they leave it totally up to you to figure out and think of, okay, what are the political movers and shakers in the world going to be doing here? So there was a brief war for the throne. The Hell Knights have established a sort of a military shogunate or junta, and have taken over in a very rapid fashion as to suppress the media. She's not assumed dead. She's missing officially. And there are sort of things that are looking like they may boil over, but the country had already been embroiled with strife for so long that people are very war-weary, and they're just ready to accept new leadership. Doesn't have to be anything, and don't say all of that. Play that stuff out, right? That can be a little paragraph that you write in between sessions to help you with the world building, and have them see that in things like, what's a good word? Nobody's reading the newspaper, but nobody's doing anything about it either. The people just go on about their daily lives, sort of shuffling down the street. There's overhear conversation at the bar, like, well, it could be worse. It was worse. Probably nothing will change. So if you want to, get the feelings of the everyday people out there. Well, hopefully that's helpful. I probably have more that I could say about this, but I don't want the video to drag on forever and ever. Let me know. Have you had luck running adventure paths? Do you have any secrets to how you run modules and the like? Or have you run into the issue of they're just impossible to run unless you railroad? Because I felt that way for a very long time as well. And you could also make the argument that in the way that I'm doing them, I'm not exactly running them either. So let me know your thoughts. Thanks.